ਵੈਲਕਮ ਟੂ ਦਿਸ ਐਪੀਸੋਡ ਆਫ ਦਾ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਸ਼ੋ। ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਫਾਈਲ ਸੈਗਮੈਂਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਕਰਾਵਾਂਗੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਵੀ ਸੈਟੀ ਪੈਂਡਾਕਰ ਨਾਲ। ਡਾਕਟਰ ਪੈਂਡਾਕਰ ਜੋ ਹਨ ਬੜੇ ਲੰਮੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰਾ ਯੋਗਦਾਨ ਪਾਇਆ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੀ ਡਿਵੈਲਪਮੈਂਟ ਵਿੱਚ। ਕੀ ਕੁਝ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ, ਕੀ ਚੈਲੰਜਸ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸਨ, ਅੱਜ ਕੀ ਹਨ, ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਸਮੱਸਿਆਵਾਂ ਦਾ ਨਜਿੱਠਿਆ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ, ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਵੀ ਸੈਟੀ ਪੈਂਡਾਕਰ ਨਾਲ। Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'd like to start off with what prompted you to come to Canada and which year you came and what was the situation at that time?
I was working in the northeastern part of the country in Assam. I was in the Indian Administrative Service.
Right.
And as a very young person passing the exam and going to a place far off from Bangalore, and I kept on thinking about higher studies, and finally after 2.5 years I got a scholarship from the United Nations and also a scholarship from University of British Columbia. And when I looked up all the information I could get, this was a nice place to come for studying, so I came and joined the master's degree program in urban and regional planning at UBC.
Okay.
And in fact one afternoon when I was standing for a cup of coffee in the lineup in the cafeteria, that's where I met my wife.
Okay.
She was 3 places ahead of me, and I took this step to go and introduce myself.
Right.
And you know, at that time in the Indian Students Association, we have only 24 members.
Right.
Now we have more than 600.
Which year are you talking of?
1955.
Okay, so you came here in 1955.
Yeah.
Well, what we see today, it was absolutely different at that time.
Yeah.
So if you can take back into history and let us know as to what existed at that time, what was the kind of, your relationships with the common persons as such and also the Indians?
Well, we have now thousands of restaurants, Indian, Chinese, Vietnamese, whichever you want.
Right.
In Vancouver, we had only one Punjabi restaurant.
Okay.
So students, we didn't have much money. We didn't have the money to pay for the bus. The best place for us to eat free food, langar, was the temple.
Right.
So we used to go to the Gurdwara on 2nd Avenue.
Right.
That was the only Gurdwara in Vancouver at that time. And in the Gurdwara, the other advantage was we met other people who were extraordinarily hospitable to young students like me.
Right.
Malkit Singh Parhar was one of them who passed away some years ago. And then I got interested, partly because of that, partly because that my wife's parents had immigrated way back in 1922.
Okay.
Her father came here to work in the forest industry. He was a boom man. In the absence of all the other things, then for us as students who didn't have a great deal of money, who didn't have other Indians to socialize with, temple became not just a religious place, a place to meet other people and rejoice being together. And and then I went to school again, worked for the Ministry of Transport, went to school again for 3 years.
So like you were mentioning, sir, that you were an IAS officer in India. So did you resign from there and you pursued your studies here? What was it?
I asked for a leave of absence and they gave me a leave of absence for 1 year.
Right.
And they would not extend it, so I resigned.
Okay, so finally that tag was gone.
Yeah.
But how did you, because that IAS job is one of the best in India.
Absolutely.
Being a civil servant. So when you came over here and you started studying, and as you were saying, you didn't have much money, and then you met your wife. So while this process was going on, how did you, kind of adjust with this system? Because if I'm not wrong, probably there weren't many Indians from the area you have come from over here at that time.
Oh, hardly any. Most of the families were from Punjab.
Right.
And not until 73 or 74, when the immigration system was reformed by Pierre Elliott Trudeau when he was Prime Minister, we started to get more numbers.
Right.
When I came, there was a quota of 200 people, not 200 families, 200 persons.
Okay.
Then Diefenbaker changed it to 200 families.
Right.
And later on it changed to bringing your children and husband or wife like that. Very slow until about 1973-74 with the reform of the immigration system. And this country has come a long way. I mean, if you recall in 59 when we got married,
Right.
we went to an apartment in Kerrisdale, one of the well-to-do areas in Vancouver. Two young people, we both had jobs, one working for the government of Canada, another working for the school board as a teacher. And the manager opened the door and said, "We don't rent it to non-whites." But this is why I say to everybody, looking back at history,
Right.
Trudeau was the greatest prime minister we ever had.
Right.
Charter of Freedoms and Rights. And then the system began to reform itself.
Right.
And then when I came back from studies and started to teach at the University of British Columbia, I got involved in the community and I got involved in various organizations. And by 1970, I was elected as a director, board of directors of the United Way of Greater Vancouver.
Okay.
So by that time, I had been participating in meetings, in community organizations and all that.
Right.
So for me, it was natural because my personality is like that.
Right.
You know, I'm very interested in serving. For example, in 1976, when Akali Singh Temple, which was very, very small at Kingsway and 12th Avenue,
Right.
in a small house,
Right.
I used to go there because my father-in-law went there. And they were struggling to expand, but not enough money to do that.
Right.
And I was able to convince the city of Vancouver to give us the land where the Akali Singh
Is presently
Gurdwara is now,
Right.
3.8 acres, believe it or not, for $100,000.
Wow.
$100,000 doesn't even buy you 1/10 of an acre now.
Absolutely.
And the temple was finished in 1983, and I was chair of the building committee for the temple.
Okay.
And it was an extraordinary experience to make it happen.
Wonderful. We'll continue with the discussion. We'll go for a small break, come back, and what you have said, you're coming over here and adjusting and the kind of hospitality which you got from the Punjabis and you intermingled with them. But definitely there was a time, as you mentioned, that racism existed. But how that change started happening, we would like to know a little bit more about this after this break. ਸੋ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਜੋ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋਈ ਜੀ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਪਿੰਡੋਕਰ ਨੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ 1955 ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਆਏ ਸੀ ਅਤੇ UBC ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਪੜ੍ਹਨ ਆਏ IAS ਅਫਸਰ ਸਨ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਅਸਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੇਕਿਨ ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਨਾ ਬਹੁਤੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਸੀ ਨਾ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਰ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਨਾ ਹੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਾਂਤ 'ਚੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਰਗੇ ਲੋਕ ਸਨ ਪਰ ਪੰਜਾਬੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਇੰਟਰਮਿੰਗਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਲੰਗਰ ਛਕਿਆ ਕਰਨਾ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਦੋਸਤੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਣੀ ਤੇ ਅਲਟੀਮੇਟਲੀ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਸਹਾਈ ਹੋਏ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੋ ਇਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦਾ 3.5 ਏਕੜ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਸੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਸਿਟੀ ਆਫ ਵੈਂਕੂਵਰ ਨੂੰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮੋਬਿਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਤਾਂ ਫਾਈਨਲੀ ਇਹ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲੀ ਸੀ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਪਿੰਡੋਕਰ ਤੋਂ ਹੋਰ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਲੈਣੇ ਜੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕਿ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਰੇਸਿਜ਼ਮ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੀ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਰਲ ਮਿਲ ਕੇ ਕੁਝ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਖਲੋਤੇ ਹਾਂ Once again, welcome back to the program. In today's segment, we are talking to Dr. Pendakar ਅਤੇ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਪਿੰਡੋਕਰ ਨੇ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਕਦੋਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ ਕੀ ਕੁਝ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀਤਾ ਆਓ ਹੋਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜੀਵਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਇਆ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਲੈਣੇ So what was the situation at that time? Like you were mentioning that you didn't get an apartment for rent, but today the situation has changed that now our people have become landowners and they are further progressing in all the fields. So take me back to the 60s and the 70s as to while you were a student and also you had started working for the ministry. What was the kind of interaction between the communities? How did that change in the thinking of the people started happening?
I think there are three basic reasons. Now, as more educated, more entrepreneurial, more self-doers
Right.
started to come, the nature of our community changed. We are now aggressively pursuing every field of endeavor that you can think about.
Right.
We have scientists, we have teachers, we have professors, we have broadcasters. There is no profession where we are not taking part. So that was not, we were not able to accomplish it when you had only maybe 1,000 people or 500 people or whatever. So, the larger numbers gives us a larger base.
Right.
In addition to that, because of our entrepreneurial spirit and ability to mobilize family capital and other capital together, a large number of our people are in self-employed businesses.
Right.
You know, the thinking is we're all selling groceries and we're all selling restaurant business.
Right.
That is partly true. Or we're all in the clothing business. That is partly true.
Right.
But there's a lot of professions in where very, very successful. So that brings different character, different aspects of giving and taking in the community.
Right.
Where we used to give money only to the temples. But now look at the emergency center, Guru Nanak Emergency Center in Surrey Hospital is because of the donations from the South Asian community.
Right.
So, as the numbers have increased, the diversity has increased, and we have still kept our culture.
Right.
And that doesn't mean we don't have problems. We have lots of challenges out there.
Right.
What has changed is that opportunity to become part of the majority rather than an insignificant minority.
Right.
That changes the outlook of the rest of the people.
Right.
You see a very successful person who is from Poland, you think, oh my God, you know, all the Polish people must be very smart.
Right.
So, we're getting there, but we have overcome a lot of problems, but we still have a lot of problems.
We'll talk about these problems also, but in the 60s and the 70s, as Dr. Pendakur you were telling, you know, the temple was a place which was a point of integration for all the communities.
Yes.
Take us back into that phase and tell us as to how you used to integrate from all the communities, the Hindus, Sikhs, and all coming together and trying to talk about issues, because these were the social areas also where you used to meet apart from, you know, praying and eating and all that. So, what was the kind of environment at that time?
I think because basically we had the people from Punjab. We did not have many people from outside of Punjab.
Right.
As a result, the real meeting place, both religious and social, was the temple or the temples.
Okay.
You know, the first temples were in Vancouver, then there were the Abbotsford temples, then the Surrey temples. And if you go back to, let's say, mid-70s, then we started to see expansion of temples.
Right.
By that time, Rasavani Gurdwara had been built on, you know, Marine Drive.
Right.
So, we were seeing a lot of changes wherein the success of the community had been reflected in seva and donations.
Right.
Because if the community itself is making minimum wages, how are you going to make this, how are you going to build these temples?
Right.
So, all those changes together made it possible for us to do. Let me come back to the point you raised. It was an extraordinarily interesting time because with the growth of the community, the advantages are we're successful in everything, but the disadvantages are we're broken up into Gujaratis, the Hindus, the Punjabis, the Muslims, and
whatnot.
Million groups.
Right.
And we derive strength in numbers, but we don't derive strength in divisions.
That's right.
Now, there is one more thing in our community. It is slowly coming. All of us do some kind of seva,
Right.
whether it is the temple or the family or whatever. But we have to move beyond the Indian community to do seva.
That's right.
So, whether it is the United Way or the Red Cross or whether it is the Blood Bank or whether it is the Hospital Foundation.
Right.
So, I have done this all my life, and it is a tremendous pleasure to be involved in other organizations.
Absolutely. So, when you started off at that time, were you accepted in the mainstream also, because a different color, different skin, and how did you also integrate and try to bring up the image of the Indians also amongst the mainstream?
I think there were again more than one factor. I was already a professor at the University of British Columbia. That gave me a little bit of a position to be accepted. And I was able to speak and articulate my ideas reasonably well. So, that gave me a little bit of a hedge.
Right.
And the agencies were also beginning slowly in 75, 76, or maybe even earlier, to show the presence of non-white people on their boards.
Right.
So some agencies.
Okay.
So this was all happening, all of it together, not one by one.
Right.
And you also have to have inside you the force that drives you to go and serve in different boards.
Absolutely.
If it doesn't happen from inside,
Then
it
of
won't
course
happen.
it won't happen.
And coming back to the question of racism, it exists in very subtle ways even now. You know, I may have been in Canada 65 years, and people will say to me, "Where are you from?" And I say to them, "Vancouver."
Right.
Then they say, "Where are you from?" I
Right.
say, "Vancouver." Then they say, "Oh, before that." I said, "Vancouver."
Vancouver.
So we need to not only inculcate an image that we are here,
Right.
but our roots are somewhere else,
Right.
but our presence and our future is here.
Right.
We may go for a holiday, we may go for a wedding,
Right.
we may do all those things, but we are here.
Absolutely.
But we're here means to me being inside the community, also outside the community.
Very true. But does that kind of thinking exist? Because the tags of Indo-Canadians, Pakistani Canadians, Caribbean Canadians, and what not, all kinds of Canadians. But are we really Canadians? This topic I would like to continue in our next episode. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you very much for your time. तो आज डॉक्टर पेंडोकर ਨਾਲ ਜੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਆਫ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਕੋਲੰਬੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਐਜ਼ ਅ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਅਤੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਟਰਾਂਸਪੋਰਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਖੇਤਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਕੁਝ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਚੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਿਕਲ ਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਇਸ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੇ ਹੈਗਾ ਸੀ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਕਮਿਊਨੀਕੇਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਸੀ। ਰੇਸਿਜ਼ਮ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਸਟਲ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਦੇਖੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਨਵੀਆਂ ਏਜੰਸੀਜ਼ ਆ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਸੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਬੋਰਡਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਲੈਵਲ ਸੈੱਟ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਇੰਡੀਅਨਸ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਮੇਜ ਸੀ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਚੇਂਜ ਕੀਤਾ। मैंने को एक सवाल पूछा कि गुरुद्वारियां दे विच उस समय हिंदू भी आते सी, सिख भी आते सी, एक सोशल हब भी हुंदा सी ते इन्होंने कहा बिल्कुल यही हुंदा सी, असीं सारे रल मिल के समस्यावां दे बारे गलबात करते सी ते उन्हां दे आंसरस भी लभदे सी। इस विषय के उत्ते अगले हफ्ते तुहाडे नाल असीं गलबात करांगे जिस दे विच कि डॉक्टर पेंडोकर तो होर जानकारी लांगे कि इन्हां दे जीवन में जो कुछ कामयाबियां होईयां, किहड़ी चीज़ ड्राइविंग फोर्स है जो इन्हां नूं मोटिवेट करदी है ते अज यंगस्टर्स जिहड़े ने की इन्हां दी जिंदगी चों सिख सकदे ने।